Good morning, good morning, good morning. This is Tasemere, your host of the Blackout live from New York. Just to give you guys a little bit of background, this segment's purpose is to celebrate Black folks across the diaspora and to have open dialogue about Black economics, how we reimagine trends in business, and explore the magic that we have. Today, we are joined by Marc Polite. He is a well-known poet, writer, and founder and editor-in-chief of Polite on Society. So let's get into it. We have some topics that we definitely want to discuss. Marc, thank you so much for joining us today. How are you?
I'm doing just fine, Tasemere. Thank you for having me on. Appreciate it.
No problem. So before we jump right into our burning topic of today, give the people a little bit of background about who you are.
Okay. All right. So for those watching, good morning. My name is Marc Polite. I am an author, a blogger, and a poet. And I've been, around in the web space. I started my blog back in 2009, politesociety.com. And from it, I grew into being a self-published author and branched out that way. Most of what I discuss has to do with Black history, social matters, issues. I also do book reviews and stuff like that. So I'm more of like a commentator and everything like that. So that's kind of what I like to get into. Also talk about technology stuff on the side too, but that's more of a hobby kind of thing. So basically, yeah, that's what I'm about. And you could read my site, and if you also ever motivated, you should also subscribe to it as well. No subscription is free, you know what I mean? So
So
nothing
give
personal,
people
free
the
information.
contact information of the site and the blog.
Yeah. So it's politeonsociety.com. And I usually update it at least 3 times a week typically. So everybody is kind of switching up. People do video blogs now, but I maintain to be a regular blogger where I'm just writing there all the time, because I'm just a fan of the written word. Like there's just so much that can be imparted with the written word that can kind of get lost in translation with videos and context and explanations and everything. So yeah, I just kind of stick with that. And that's kind of what my forte is.
I think that the art of writing is getting lost on people, and the power of words and the choices and the power that the definition of the word actually means. So you'll see people just casually saying, whatever they're saying without understanding the impact of the words that they are using. And you and I had a very brief but profound conversation around race, as this is Black History Month and we're celebrating our Black leaders and shining lights on different prominent people that we know, but we might also not know, and what's happening in the states around this debate of including slavery in history discussions or not. Wanted to get your impact or your thoughts on that, but also how does it relate back to works? Because we have Langston Hughes, which was an amazing author. We have Maya Angelou, who is an amazing poet and writer. But what happens when we start canceling out the relevance of their bodies of work?
Yeah, I would say that this is a very dangerous time that we're living in, and I don't say that lightly. You have this whole uh, forced controversy over critical race theory and whether or not actual history should be taught in the schools, and you have southern governors saying they don't want certain things in the curriculum, and taking certain books off, out of the learning library. And it's as much as as much as people on the far right complain about cancel culture, you would think that there's going to be some sort of equity in terms of looking at how it's a horrible thing to say, oh, we don't want this book to be read. We don't want this subject to be taught. We should not teach about American history, about American slavery and everything. And I would say particularly it's a dangerous time because when we're talking about censorship, right? And this is what it is. There's a difference between like, for example, the controversy over the whole Joe Rogan situation about how some people are saying that Spotify should do something because he's spreading disinformation. There's a difference between, corporations saying we don't want this content or we're going to support this content versus people saying that the school board has the right to take these books out of the curriculum, to not teach these. That's censorship. Take it from a commercial platform. No, that's consequences. Like what I love, what a lot of people don't really talk about. The artist India Ari recently pulled her music off of Spotify because of the racist ideas that Joe Rogan plays into, and that's not being discussed. And she's one of the few artists that has made that stance, and we should encourage that more often. That's not censorship; that's consequences. You can be able to say things without consequence. But the only problem here is that there's a false equivalence between not letting people spread disinformation and also saying that, we shouldn't teach about the 1619 Project. That's two different things. And false equivalency is dangerous because it leads to, and it's willfully leads to misunderstandings. And that's not what we want. If we're going to have a real dialogue about how to improve this country, about how to improve, relations between people, like between races and all that, how do you even get to that if you can't have a groundwork of which to discuss these things? So I just think it's really in a dangerous moment here.
I agree because, people have often said hide gems in books, right? And so now we are also rewriting history. Like, let's be honest, we as African American people don't really know a lot about history, of our own history, right? Exactly. So it isn't until you may go into college or you take up the torch yourself and you say, hey, I want to learn about this, that, or what have you, that you actually start to delve into what's going on. And it takes a lot of critical thinking, and it's in books, right? It's in books, it's in periodicals, it's in journals. It's not necessarily on video. A lot of things you have to open up a book and you have to read it. So if now we're talking about the art of writing is being lost, we also had a private conversation about folk history. That's where most people started learning their family history, is that it was passed down orally from one generation to the next. We also no longer do that as much as we did before. So we have the oral history has gaps, and now the written history is like, can't read that, can't learn about that. So rewriting the history and potentially having a generation of people that have misinformation intentionally, like saying that enslaved Black folks were the same as indentured servants, will rewrite all of the slavery narrative around Black America, right? Like, I don't understand. Well, I do understand because I was a history major. The Confederates are still mad that they lost the war, right? They don't want to admit that they lost. So they need to figure out how to rewrite themselves back into power. And this is one way to do it. If you don't teach about it, and you have generations of people that never learned about it, or what they learn is misinformed, then it's a way for you to start propaganda, which is amazing. Which I think the art of writing is just lost. How do we get people to write? How do we get people to read? How do we get more people to write about this? Because it's almost like if you're not in the South, you don't kind of care that this is happening. How do we get more people to write about it and bring it to the forefront?
That's a great question, Tasemere. That's a great question. I would say, in my opinion, we need like a two-prong approach. Number one, the gaps in the things that we don't know, the gaps in our education, the things we don't know about Black history, things we don't know about our own neighborhoods, the things we don't know about our people. We need to start doing our own independent research, aside from what we might ever learn in school. And so, there's that part. We have to be willing to take a trip to the library after work and just go ahead and learn some things that you might not be familiar with, and not just let the deterioration just happen. Because one stat that stayed with me, that I read a few years ago, is that there are a lot of people who graduate, who go to college, graduate college, finish a degree and everything, and never pick up a book ever again. That's a major problem, because at whatever point you graduated, ever since then, so much has changed. Information has amassed. New books come out, new research has come out. Like, so, for example, when I was in college, I did not have the benefit of reading about the 1619 Report. It just wasn't even around. So the scholarship is updated constantly. So the problem is, number one, people have to take it upon themselves to fill in gaps in the information what they don't know, and do their own independent research. Number two, we can still make that push towards things that we think should be in the curriculum, and push towards higher education, and push for things to be included in college curriculums and everything like that, and still fight that fight at the same time. But I think it's going to take both approaches to do what's right, and to actually get people see the relevance in writing and reading. Because if you really look at it, we talk about writing is recording of history, and if whoever writes the books, that's what goes down in history. If somebody said, well, slavery wasn't that bad or anything, then if there's no one around to contest the story, then people will believe what's written. And so people need to take it upon themselves, as just even folk history, even history of, well, that's not quite the way it happened, like, say something, you can refer to something like, I don't know, like random, like the Blackout of 2003. Like, you say, okay, this is the way it officially happened, and this is the way that it was represented in the history books. But if you were actually there and you remember the Blackout of 03, you can say, no, this is how it actually went. Like certain areas of the city had their lights come on first. The downtown areas of Manhattan had their lights come on first, and people in the Bronx was waiting for an extra few days for their lights to come on. They prioritize the financial sector first. But you're not going to read that in any book. It's just going to be uniform. Well, the lights came on at the same time. But if nobody writes these things, then nobody will actually remember that, oh, this is how it actually happened. Just a minor example of how even something that was only 20, that's almost 20 years ago, is kind of like the details of it are kind of forgotten. So, and that's what we need to start doing.
So I have another question.
Mm-hmm.
You know that a lot of people are now YouTube influencers, and they bring the news, right? They're like these unofficial journalists and broadcasters, but they also don't necessarily do research. Like when you're working for when you're working for a network, you usually have to do some sort of research on your story, right? Like certain facts have to be checked or what have you. With the digital age, anybody can be in front of a camera and say almost whatever they want. So it's that freedom of expression, the freedom of speech, and then freedom of press colliding together to erase like history. how do we combat that as a people? Because I don't think there's enough of us that want to read and want to write. To your point, most people probably after high school or after college don't ever pick up a book again, right? Or now we're into audiobooks. So now people are like, I read books, but I listen to the audiobook, right? So how do we encourage the lost art of reading and writing?
I would say that, I'm not saying this to shade YouTubers. I'm not. There's some good informative YouTubers out there, but unfortunately, because of the way the platform works, it can lend itself to people spreading a lot of misinformation or like things out of context, and that's a danger that needs to be guarded against, because misinformation can be just as dangerous as anything else. If you really look at some of the things that's said about, like, I don't trust this, I don't trust that, I don't trust the shot and everything, and that information itself could lead to somebody's demise and everything like that. So we need to be kind of careful about that. And here's the thing about a video, like a 10-minute video versus like reading the actual chapter. Contextual things, like in a video, people will only share with you exactly what they want you to know, but nothing else more. If you're reading a book, right? If you go chapter by chapter, you're going through it and you're saying, okay, look, I didn't quite get that passage. Let me reread that. Let me look that up, look up the word and understand the context and everything like that. It's more work. And I think part of the reason why video content is really proliferated is because, people don't necessarily want to do the work of reading because they think it's so time consuming. But this kind of gets into your second question about love of reading. I think that the way for us to approach people with it is to say that, well, I mean, you may look at a 200-page book, right? You don't have to read it all in one sitting. People say they watch 10-minute YouTube videos, 15-minute YouTube videos. Even sometimes people watch whole hour, 2-hour live streams, right? But the thing about it is that if you take a 200-page book, right, just very simply, and just break it down to say, I'm only going to read 10 pages a day. If you break that down, you can have that done maybe, depending on how the rate that you read at, maybe in a half an hour, But think about that time spent reading that 10 pages a day versus people can be on YouTube scrolling for hours. People can be on social media for scrolling for 4 hours, and then you realize, wait, it was just 9 o'clock and it's 1 o'clock and I'm still scrolling. And it's social media is a time suck, and we don't realize how much time we're spending on it, like self included. It's something we have to kind of like deliberately, like be mindful of what you're trying to spend. So if you're going to spend your time learning, sometimes just reading it is more thorough. It's a little bit more involved. Reading a book is a commitment. Reading a 250-page book is a commitment, and committing to I'm going to read 10 pages a night is a commitment. But it's an investment in your own mind. It's an investment in yourself. And I guess part of my answer is for people to see the value of reading, is to just see it as an investment in yourself as well, because you can scroll through videos all day, all afternoon, but how many people are actually taking tips from this and actually writing down notes about, I want to do this? But it becomes an entertainment platform where you're just like, okay, like I watched this video and then it's just to be another video, and then meanwhile I'm watching, and meanwhile an hour has passed and I haven't implemented anything, I haven't learned anything. So there's a big difference between that and actually sitting down and committing yourself to sitting in one place for half an hour and reading a book. That's why a lot of people, read during their commute, because at least it's focused learning as opposed to just kind of scrolling your timeline, kind of picking out pieces of news bit by bit with no context and no explanation. And that's my answer.
So I have a theory that I think people don't like to think as much anymore. And I think that reading forces you to think, right? Because sometimes if you don't read with comprehension, you got to go back and read it again because you're like, the point was over my head. I totally missed it. So I think that sometimes we have moved so far away from the fine art of thinking, which goes into reading and dialogue, right? Because I can have my own interpretation of what was written, and then maybe we could talk about it, right? We can, I can call you and I can say, Mark, listen, on chapter blah blah blah, and then that involves like a certain level of thinking, I think. And I think that some people just don't want to think. maybe we have ventured into a space where people don't want to think as much anymore. So what do we do with the new generation that is only on videos? Everything has to be 30 seconds or less for like certain videos or certain platforms. So no one's doing anything longer than 1 minute sometimes on IG, right? How do we tie this back into the generation that is not the Gen Z, because they already there, but I'm talking about like the new alpha generation. My son is in this new alpha generation since he's 1. How do we get those folks to enjoy reading and bring back the art of reading and writing and thinking? Because I think we might have lost a couple generations already.
Well, that's a good question. I'd really say that, even in a video format, what I would love to see somebody do, I would love to see somebody like a TikToker, right? That makes like sharp points, right? And makes like punchy little points, and then has like maybe a book list underneath it. Like say, okay, you want to read something about this? Okay, such and such said this. And if you want to read more, go read How You're Underdeveloped Africa by Walter Rodney. I would like to see something like that. Like if some a TikToker come out and say like such and such said this. Arturo Schomburg said that we should study our own history and learn about our people. And then if you want to read more, like go learn more at go visit the Schomburg website and everything. Just little punchy things like that to get people like intrigued about it, because you have to tie it to like tie it to the longer history. I wouldn't know how to do that myself. I wish I could, but I'm not really that sharp with the TikTok. I'm on there, but I'm not really on there heavy like that. I don't really get it, the platform. But like if somebody could come up with some kind of punchy way to link what's going on today to our history and get people involved in it, that would be an awesome thing to connect that bridge and everything.
I agree with that. That brought me, I was just thinking about, now there's people that want to write books. This might be a controversial topic, so definitely say, like, I don't want to talk about it. But people want to write books, but they don't really want to write the book. They just want to hire ghostwriters to say that they wrote the book. How does that work? In the written space, I'm always intrigued by that, because I know that people do hire, like you can go on Fiverr and hire a ghostwriter to write a book for you, right? And now you're an author, but you're an author who also doesn't like to read. Help me to understand. Help me to understand this. I'm a little confused.
Well, I mean, it's a bag for a writer that gets that contract. Yeah, it's a bag right there. But as far as the people that want to tell a story, and aren't writers. I mean, that's a thing. It's just like there are kind of like singers who don't sing but like want to get people to write songs for them and everything. It's kind of the same deal. Um, if you can work with somebody that can help you tell your story, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. But it's one thing to do that, but don't pretend that you're a reader. Don't pretend that you know a lot of stuff. That's one thing. Like, it's like if you're not a rapper and you're reciting somebody else's lines and everything, and somebody ghost wrote something for you and you're spitting it. Okay, you have a nice song, but don't try to pretend like you get in the booth and be like, "Oh, I got freestyling this." Nah, don't do that. Don't do that. So, I mean,
I agree,
yeah,
because I get so confused. Like, I'm like, I know this person didn't write this book. Like, I know this person just probably had like a concept or something, right?
yeah,
Which is totally fine.
yeah.
People,
That's fine.
you get writing coaches and things like that. But I'm like, but don't try to tell me that you're this world-renowned author, right? Because
Hmm.
you're the idea person for the book. So also getting just a little bit into that with everyone that are becoming authors, what does it take to actually sell your work? It's one thing to maybe have the concept,
Yeah.
maybe hire a writing coach or a ghostwriter to write the book, right? But then how do you get people to purchase the book? What is that like?
Well, that's a great question. Wow. So, to answer that question, the best way I can put it is you got to be your own promoter. But which is not a struggle for me necessarily because I was a blogger first. I was a blogger before I was an author, so that's really not a big deal to me. But for those listening, once you have a book that you're ready to release to the whole world, you've got to kind of let people know that it's coming. You've got to kind of lay the foundation, let people know, okay, I have this book coming. It's about this. It's coming out in April or whatever, and then say to people like, okay, this is what it's about, and kind of lay a foundation. Secondly, you need to kind of enlist people who are into what you're talking about. If, say, for example, if you write poetry, if you're working on a poetry book, right? You can actually start venturing out. Well, not venture out because it's COVID, but you can hit up like open mic situations and go into open mic Zooms and everything where you have a chance to read your work and let people know, okay, like I read this one poem from my forthcoming book. Like if you know you have a book coming in April, right? Like if there's an open mic you want to go to in March, you can say, okay, let me read one of my poems. I just need 3 minutes. Let me read one of my poems for my book and let people know, oh, I got this book coming out. The name of it is coming out in April. Follow me on Twitter, Instagram, that kind of stuff. But you have to be your own promoter. And to get people to buy the book, you have to kind of find people who are connected with it. Like if you know a scene or people who are in the poetry, visit those scenes. If you know people who are into science fiction, then go to those outlets. If you know there's people that's really into politics, you can go to those outlets and say, okay, like if you know there's a bookstore that focuses on political books, you can reach out to the bookstore and say, hey, would you be interested in having your books having my books being sold in your store? And then you reach out to them via email and maybe like sign an agreement and figure out, okay, what's the split? Is it a 40-60 split or 50-50 split, whatever it is for the bookstore? There's a lot of ways you can promote yourself and get people interested in your book. But it also involves you kind of using your platform and establishing, a presence online, because even without the benefit of having a lot of different book events, because situation is now, you can still garner up a lot of different interests with your topics.
That was amazing. Thank you for those jewels right there. But to tie this back into our earlier conversation, how does this impact the removal of Black history from potential school settings. Should Black people just start writing? Should that be one way that we combat this? Is that people pick up the pen or hire a ghostwriter or whatever we're going to do, and we're just going to flood the market with information about Black history and Black culture? Is that something that we should do to kind of combat this whole erasing of history?
Yeah, I think that's one pursuit. We should definitely be more open to telling our stories, and I definitely have to say that. One thing that I didn't mention in my introduction is that, in addition to being an author, I'm also a proud member of the Harlem Writers Guild, and we're an organization that focuses on cultivating Black writers within the African diaspora. If you want to find out more information about us and our history, you can visit harlemwritersguild.org, and you can see some of our historic members and everything. But with that said, right, I would say that we need two approaches. We need both to write our history, write our stories, and even though it seems a lot more difficult, we also need to push back on some of this stuff. We need to go to our school board and say, why are you banning this book? Why are you taking out this book about certain topics? Like, write letters and be like, no, I don't support this ban on teaching about Black history. I don't support this. You know what? If you want to make this a thing, guess what? You're going to have to answer for it during the midterm election. You have to get political with people and say, you're not going to destroy our history, and you're not going to water down the history without consequences. Now that comes later, even some of the things that the governor's doing, they're being contested in court. And I think that's an avenue too. That's more of something that people on the legal side of things can pursue. I can't speak on that necessarily, but that needs to happen too. But as individuals, we can still write our own stories, and we can get the word out there about what's actually happening to people. About what's happening in our neighborhoods. We can talk about things that's happening. For example, like the privatization of public housing, like how they have designs on basically destroying the New York City Housing Authority and taking things over and making things go from public management to private management, and selling off plots of land and dispersing this part of the average rents in New York City have climbed like 30-40%, and there's no discussion of it in mainstream media whatsoever. And so for these reasons and a lot more, we need to tell our stories.
So how does someone who might not think that they are a writer or a great writer, or they don't write well, where do you think they should start by giving their perspective about what is happening and their opinions? How do you even start? Do you just pick up pen and paper and start writing? What do you do?
Well, I mean, I would encourage people to learn, to start picking up the pen and writing, because I'll say this, despite being in this for a while, I want to caution against the idea of elitism, that only people who've already in the industry can make this and do this, that. No, like, we need more folks that's coming into this game to continue the legacy. Like, I would go so far, I would welcome people who don't think of themselves as writers to not let that discourage you. When I was an undergrad, I didn't consider myself a writer, but here I am now. But I would say, just start with just just keeping little notes on about your day, and like you know how we have these phones where you have like a phone notes and everything. You could write on a train and everything. Like, okay, I gotta get here. It's gonna take me an hour to get here. Let me pull out my phone notes and start jotting down ideas about what I want to talk about. Little things. And then just email it to yourself or just send it, like start an Evernote account. And then send some of your little ideas, some of the ideas you have. It doesn't have to be like a whole page. It could be like 2 sentences. Type it, send it to your Evernote account. It's a way of kind of building up, and then you'll get to the point where after a month you could have a whole premise of a book. You can start small. You can just start. You just start where you are, and then really just don't think of it as like, oh, I'm just struggling. I'm just starting. No, just use it as a way of the building up. Because we all have unique stories to share, and I would encourage people to study the craft, pick up books about self-publishing. Daniel Pointer had books about self-publishing. Just look into, just even start off with a Google search about how to self-publish a book. How to write a paragraph. How to quote and explain. How to construct an argument. Like sentence structure, just simple things like that, just to start you off. Don't let the idea of you having to produce a 200-page manuscript be intimidating to you. And that's kind of what I would say to people who want to get out there and want to start writing. Don't let the industry as it is intimidate you, to make you feel as though, well, I don't have anything to say. I'm not established. No, just work on yourself like little by little and work your way up.
I agree. I think that we have to figure out a way that we combat what's happening, because if we don't, this is also, writing is also a form of propaganda, right? So, like, if there's no one, to your point earlier, to contest the story or details of how something happened, then whatever is the living work will be considered to be truth, because there's no one else there to contradict events or details or anything like that. And that will just live on and become whatever it's going to become. So I agree that while we are doing like lots of video blogging and on YouTube creating content, that we probably should equally focus on just writing op-ed articles or eventually self-publishing a book, just our take on the experience that is going on now, because I think that this is real about the canceling of certain history. I also think that just a lot of Black folks don't necessarily study things in college that make them think. That's just my opinion. It might not be popular, but I think that we don't spend a lot of time on. I think we concentrate on things that are going to make us a lot of money, right? We don't necessarily concentrate on things that make us think, because we feel like there's no money in like thinking. But in a world where no one thinks, you become like a unicorn, because you can think and you can read and you can write. But I think that we don't spend a lot of time doing some of those things, and we just fall into whatever the propaganda storyline tells us, right? So most people haven't even connected the Confederate to like this cancel culture. And I know that because I was a history major. So I totally was like, oh yeah, they just want to cancel out the fact that they lost the war. They want to cancel that out, and they want to replace it with something else that kind of says that they didn't lose. And then they don't have to talk about what they have done, because most people aren't going to read.
Yeah, that's it.
Tell the people, before we wrap up and go, let the people know, how do we connect with you if we wanted to know more about what you're writing? How do we connect with you? How do we follow you? Can someone that's not from Harlem join the Harlem Writers Guild, or do they need to like join something else?
Okay. All right. So in closing, thank you for having me on, Tasemere. I definitely appreciate it. So to answer your question about how you can connect with me, what you can do is you can reach out to me via politeonsociety.com, POLITESOCIETY.com, and basically we can get linked up there. If you also want to, I'm also available on on email. Mark.w.polite@gmail.com. Pardon me, it's early, y'all. Pardon me, you got excuse brother. But I'm also available on IG at Marc Polite, and also on Instagram and Twitter. So you can reach out to me there. If you want to find out more about the Harlem Writers Guild, you can reach out to the website, theharlemwritersguild.org. And no, you don't have to be from Harlem to be part of the Harlem Writers Guild. We actually have a international community of writers. We have people from Brazil, where people, folks, linking it from the United Kingdom, folks from West Africa. So yeah, I would say you can find out more about us, and we're also on Facebook. Just search under the Harlem Writers Guild, and you can find our Facebook page. And we're on Twitter as well. So basically, that's it. So we could link up there. Send me an email, follow me on Twitter, IG, and also I have a Polite Society page on Facebook. So you could link up with me all these different places.
Thank you so much. We had Marc Polite coming to us from Harlem, New York, to discuss this whole cancel culture of canceling out slavery in our school system and almost banning books from making it in there, and the importance of Black folks writing, reading, politicking about not having this happen, and also a little bit about Black History Month. We talked a little bit about that too and the importance. So this has been Tasemere, your host of the Blackout Live from New York. Thank you again, Marc, for coming to join us. You're welcome anytime. And we will be back next week interviewing the former mayor of a small urban city or township in New Jersey, and his experience being the mayor there, challenges that he faced, and things that he thinks that we need to do moving forward. Thank you so much. Ciao.
All right. Take care.